1045 The Team, your home for New York sports. This weekend at the Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York, it is going to be the inductions for the Hall of Fame. And joining us right now is the author of The Onion Picker, Carmen Basilio, and Boxing in the 1950s, Gary Youmans. Gary, a lot of people not familiar with the 50s boxing, not familiar so much with Carmen Basilio. Teach us a little bit about him, and why was this important for you to do?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, I grew up in Syracuse, so, Carmen fought from 1948 through 1961. And so I was always a big fan of his. And I had written a couple of books, sports books. I wrote a book on the 1959 Syracuse National Championship football team, which my brother actually played on, and he helped me write the book. And we wrote another book on the 1963 Chicago Bears. But anyway, Syracuse University Press was a company that actually had published the books. And I was up there one day going over some things with them, and they asked me, "Did you ever think about writing a book about boxing?" And I said, "No, but I love boxing." And they said, that would be something you ought to consider. And so when I went home, I was thinking about it. I said, I wonder if anybody ever wrote anything on Carmen Basilio. And I was surprised to find out that nobody had. So that was kind of the start of this project. And so I met with Carmen, and I spent a lot of time with him. And it's funny because originally it was just kind of going to be a book about Carmen, about his career and his life. And as I got into the research, the elephant in the room was really not just Carmen, but was also the mob and how they had taken over boxing in the early 1950s, just as Basilio was coming on, becoming a professional fighter. And what was intriguing to me was that a lot of people, you ask them about the mob and boxing, they say, "Oh, yeah, we know that." But what I didn't know was that how this all came about, that the guy that owned, James Norris, owned all the arenas in and around the area. For example, he owned the Cincinnati Gardens, the Chicago Stadium. They owned just all these arenas, and they had the TV contracts. But what they didn't have was the boxers. So this is how they got in bed with the mob. The mob would go get the fighters, and then they not only controlled the arenas, TV, but they also controlled the boxers. And unfortunately for Carmen, he was coming along and ran right into these guys because they would make fighters, lose fights, or if they wanted to get a shot at a championship fight, they had to go through them. And Basilio refused to deal with the mob. He just said, "Screw him, I'm not doing it. I'll earn it on my own." But they held him back. So that's kind of how it came about. So it was an intriguing story, just because here's Carmen trying to do things the right way, and of course the mob's trying to do things the easy way. So that's kind of how it all got started.
It's so fascinating, that whole story there with the mob and him, but you kind of touched on it there at the end, the ramifications of almost not following the mob's orders and lead. What was that like, the ramifications for Carmen saying no to them?
Well, they held him back. He could not get a championship fight. Even though Basilio became the number one contender, he would not. They would bypass him and pick other fighters. And at that time, some of the mob fighters were, a couple of Kid Gavilan, a number of different fighters that actually had championship rings. You were totally controlled there. But finally, what happened was that Basilio's manager, Johnny DeJohn, actually went to the mob and said, "Look, our guy needs to get a shot." So they finally, because of just the public opinion, Carmen got his shot, and in 1955 he knocked out Tony DeMarco in Syracuse to win the welterweight championship.
Gary Youmans with us right now, 1045 The Team. The book is called The Onion Picker, Carmen Basilio and Boxing in the 1950s. But The Onion Picker, why is that the name?
Well, his father, that's what he was. His father was an onion farmer in Canastota, and came over from Italy, the turn of the century, when there was such a influx of Italians coming to the United States. And so, there's 10 kids in the family. They grew up poor, and he just fell in love with the sport. His father, it was interesting, back when Carmen was born in 27, and in the 30s, with the only thing they had was radio, and his father Joseph loved boxing, so they would listen. The kids would all sit in the living room, and they would have the fights on the radio. And one day his father came home with two sets of boxing gloves for his kids to box. His mother didn't really care that they were going to do that, but anyway, that's how Carmen sort of got into it. And then when he got to high school, he was on the Canastota High School boxing team.
And just a reminder, the Hall of Fame boxing induction ceremony is this weekend, Canastota, New York. Carmen Basilio, his legacy is definitely there in the city of Canastota. And his legacy may even get bigger and bigger as the years progress. There's rumors out there about a Carmen Basilio movie on the way. Do you have any details about that?
Yeah, I've been involved in that for 7 years. Myself and Owen Shapiro, who is the head of the film department at Syracuse University, and another friend of ours, Rick Odom, the three of us wrote a script actually based on the book, and we have now got the funding almost totally 100% in place that we will go into production on this film probably in the late fall, and much of the story is based on the book, but we think we got a really interesting script. We've had a lot of people read it. We've entered some different contests over the years. We've got some really nice reviews. So we think we have a very, very interesting story that will be filmed in the Central New York area, and perhaps even in the capital region. It's been a labor of love, to be honest with you. We've worked very hard on this, and I think it's going to finally come into fruition.
Well, Gary, that gives us a moment now to selfishly promote that Levack and I are willing to be in the movie.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
You need a sports broadcaster dressed up in the 1950s? We're down for it.
Right. A lot of people say we have boxers' builds, long retired boxers, but still.
Well, you got to take your shirt off, and I can't help you then. So
No, I can't help you if I take my shirt off, Gary.
Gary, we appreciate the time, man. Thank you so much for talking more about Carmen Basilio, and hopefully you're up in Canastota enjoying the Boxing Hall of Fame weekend like others.
I will. There's so much. Thanks. I really enjoyed it.